Tanking health. You may like it or you may not, but it's pretty useful. You're able to farm a bit longer to get more money throughout the game, and your health always acts like a cushion in case you ever leak a few enemies. However, your base health isn't always the same. The higher level you are, the higher your base health is. By having more health, you're effectively able to leak more and more enemies before you must defend. However, this got me wondering, how much base health will you need to tank every single enemy in a Fallen mode match? Before we start, I want to point out these informative videos take longer to make, so if you enjoy, make sure to watch until the end and leave a like on the video. To start, we must find out how many enemies of each type are spawned. There are 40 waves and each have different enemies, but since it would be too much work to count them all myself, I will just go to the wiki and see which enemies are spawned and when. Using a cool shortcut called Control F, I was able to add up all of the enemy amounts to get these results. Okay, with step 1 out of the way, we can move on to step 2, and that is multiplying the amount of enemies times their health. We do this to figure out how much health all of those enemies total. We find all of their health, and then we add it together to get this number. So are we done yet? Is that easy? Well, no, it's not. First off, you may have noticed that there are a lot of mysteries that spawn, and we only account for the health of the mysteries and not the insides, aka what the mysteries spawn when killed. So I went into a game and decided to tank some mysteries for science. Okay, good. So we don't have to worry about RNG ruining our calculations, right? No. Although it makes it easier to consider mysteries and mystery bosses out of the question, there are still these Dark Necromancers, Summoner bosses, and of course, the Fallen King. So if you haven't already guessed, all these guys can summon enemies. But what makes this a problem is that these enemies are spawned randomly, and they themselves are random. This means we cannot accurately guess how much health we will need to tank all the enemies that spawn. However, this tells us the best map for this would be Badlands, since all the enemies on Fallen are the exact same, but since the map is the shortest, it gives the least amount of time for Necromancers and Necromancer bosses to spawn enemies. Kinda weird, right? The hardest map in the game becomes the easiest if you're trying to tank all the enemies. The Dark Necromancer summons minions around every 8 seconds, same for the Summoner boss. Their speed is ranked as below average, so we need to figure out how many times a Dark Necromancer or Summoner boss will spawn enemies before reaching the end. Now, I don't have the actual speed of the enemies to be able to determine how long it will take for them to reach the end, so I have to manually count how many times the Dark Necromancer will spawn enemies before reaching the end. Okay, so now that we know how many times a Dark Necromancer will spawn minions, we need to find out which enemies it spawns. And a quick look at the wiki tells us that it spawns abnormals, quakes, shadows, and heavies. Now the goal is to find the minimum health requirement, so let's assume you're impossibly lucky and each spawn ends up spawning 4 quakes. Now we multiplied the amount of Necromancers by 5, since that's how many times it'll be spawning enemies per wave, and then multiplying it by 4 because that's how many quicks each one of the spawns, and then multiply it by 4 again because that's how much health the quicks have. And this gives us the total of this much health. Now as for the Summoner boss, it tells us it spawns 4 mysteries and rarely mystery bosses. Again, since we are looking for the minimum health requirement, let's assume it only spawns 4 mysteries per spawn. This means we multiply it by 5, which is how many times it'll spawn, then by 4, which is how many mysteries it spawns, and then by 20, which is how much health the mysteries have. Alright, so now we calculated what is likely to be the luckiest you can possibly get with Dark Necromancers and Summoner bosses. So what do we have left? Well, it's the Fallen King. The Fallen King can spawn enemies, but then again, there's also no timing to it, so it's not even guaranteed that it'll spawn to begin with. So let's assume you're the luckiest person alive yet again, and that the Fallen King won't spawn any enemies. So are we done yet? Not quite. So you know how if you do enough damage to the Fallen King, it'll enter Rage mode and gain extra health? Now, I have no idea if it'll gain extra health if you tank it, and there's no way to test it because I don't have a spare 150,000 health to tank a Fallen King, and I doubt anyone else does either. So yet again, we must assume that it does not gain extra health since we're looking for the minimum possible health requirement. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is all the calculations we need to find the total base health you need to tank every single enemy in a Fallen match. Drum roll please.